In 1925, China's first president, Sun Yat-sen, died in Beijing, leaving a political vacuum. Western diplomats reported that it would be filled by a new strongman, the commander of the Nationalist Army, Chiang Kai-shek. But few in the West or in China were aware that the new leader had a background in finance. In 1921, Chiang Kai-shek worked as a stockbroker in a building which used to stand on the corner just behind me. His financial career, though short, had important repercussions. 6 years later, when he formed his government in Nanjing, the reason that the Northern Expedition turned east instead of heading north to Beijing was in part financial. Political considerations aside, the nationalists wanted to get their hands on Shanghai's wealth and resources.
This 这个呢是上海证券物品交易所的早期的档案。证券物品交易所呢是1916年孙中山先生提议创办的。那么他创办这个交易所的目的呢，一方面就是为了筹集革命的经费，另外一方面呢也是考虑到要在上海设立金融中心的话呢，交易所是一个必不可少的金融机构。那么但是交易所呢，它的筹建也遇到很多的困难，一直到1920年的时候才正式成立。蒋介石呢是参与了交易所的筹建工作，后来也成为了交易所的一名股票的经纪人。
Chiang was a graduate of the Imperial Japanese Army Academy. He wasn't very good at stockbroking. In the winter of 1921, when the market crashed, he lost a lot of money. Now, it so happened that at that time, Sun Yat-sen was setting up his government in Guangdong to challenge the power of the northern warlords, and he was in dire need of experienced military commanders. So he asked Chiang to come south to join him. Equally important for China's political future, in Shanghai a few months earlier, the Chinese Communist Party had been founded. So as 1921 drew to a close, the two principal protagonists who would contend for power in China for most of the next 3 decades. Fast forward 5 years to the summer of 1926. The Nationalists and the Chinese Communist Party have joined together to launch the Northern Expedition. A military offensive to try to overthrow the northern warlord government in Beijing and reunify China under joint Kuomintang CCP rule. After the capture of Wuhan, the initial plan was to push on towards the north. But Chiang, now the Nationalist Army's commander-in-chief, insisted on keeping back part of his forces and marching instead on Shanghai. They took the city on March the 26th, 1927. It's not hard to understand why Chiang wanted Shanghai. It was the country's purse, its money box, and Chiang needed money to pay his armies and to finance his campaign to unify China. The people who controlled the purse strings were the bankers, tycoons, and industrialists. And Chiang's plan was to win over the leaders of the Bankers Association, who had considerable influence over the city's finances, in the belief that if he could get them on his side, the city's banks would have no choice but to cooperate with him too.
We'll go inside.
Please, I'd like to. I'd like to. Oh gosh, this is impressive. And you say this was where Chiang Kai-shek sent his people to demand money for his army?
Yes, it was.
Did they bring with them some kind of letter of authority, something to tell the banks that they had to comply from Chiang Kai-shek?
Yes.
But they could have refused, no? I mean, after all, 10 years earlier, when the government told the banks that they should stop exchanging banknotes for silver, they said no. I mean, why not refuse this time?
But this time, that would have been very difficult.
You mean Chiang Kai-shek had too much power, too many guns,
yes,
too much support
exactly.
behind him? Mm-hmm.
This is where the Banks Association used to meet. It's hardly changed. The only difference is that they used to have bronze plaque with the words financial center.
In the West, banking associations in the West are non-government, as you know. They're essentially organized by the private sector. Was it like that in Shanghai in the 20s?
It was. The association was responsible for developing banking regulations, looking after the interbank relations, and also guarding against a lot of financial risks, protecting the interests of banks, and representing the banking sector in talks with the government. Yeah.
So essentially a professional organization.
Yeah, it's very professional. Yeah.
Over the next month, the Bankers Association and the old-style traditional banks raised $6 million silver to support the Northern Expedition, on condition that Chiang agree to end the war as soon as possible. But as they soon found out, Chiang wanted more. The Nanjing government approved a compulsory bond issue, which the banks were obliged to purchase, the same method that the warlord government had used to extort funds a decade earlier. Like the warlords too, Chiang appropriated the city's customs duties and salt taxes to pay for his military expenditure. In Chiang Kai-shek's diaries, there are many references to his efforts to obtain money for the army, but very little about the methods he used. For that, we have to look at the records left by the bankers and industrialists who were at the receiving end of his fundraising campaigns. Take, for instance, the case of the industrialist Rung Zhongjing, which was typical of many others. Rung was president of the Nationwide Spinning and Weaving Works Association. He was a prominent owner of textile and flour mills. The nationalist government demanded that he buy 250,000 silver dollars worth of bonds. When he failed to raise the money, the authorities in his hometown, Wuxi, sealed up his residence and confiscated his property there. But they were unable to arrest him.
Fortunately, Mr. Long was sighted in his Shanghai's residence in the Simo Road, now the North Sanxi Road. It belonged to the international settlement then, so the Kuomintang authorities had no right to arrest him and confiscate his properties, including this building, in the settlement, without the permit by Shanghai Municipal Council.
Did he have to pay? After all that, did he have to pay the $250,000 for bonds?
Of course, he had to. He had no choice.
Could not refuse.
Of course.
The numbers which are entered in the lottery are put into 3 metal globes, and almost everyone enters the national lottery, which is almost as large.
After that, the nationalist government came up with another scheme, a lottery to finance the setting up of a Chinese national airline. It was announced with great pomp by the Deputy Treasury Secretary Jiang Shouyong. But it didn't raise enough money either. So then the government struck a deal with the banks. They were allowed to purchase government bonds at a discount and then sell them on at face value, making handsome profits. In return, the bankers did all they could to maximize government revenues. In 1928, the Northern Expedition resumed and triumphed. By 1930, China was unified once more, and the era of the warlords was over. The banking system that had been created in Shanghai now formed the core of a new national financial system serving the whole country, which initially consisted just of the main Shanghai banks, the Bank of China and the Communications Bank of China,
Farmers Bank,
and 2 non-bank financial institutions, the Central Trust of China and the Postal Savings and Remittances Bank. At the apex of the new structure, a new central bank was established to affirm the country's monetary independence, with its headquarters in the former Russo-Asiatic Bank building at number 15, the Bund.
The events of the 1920s in Shanghai and the role of Chiang Kai-shek had a significant influence on the way China's financial system developed. But they're only part of the story. Equally important to the finance houses was the fact that as Chiang was consolidating his power in Nanjing, he broke relations with the communists, which would have much more far-reaching consequences. There were also external factors. After the First World War, the United States and Japan both became global players. The growing ties between Nanjing and Washington had financial implications. So did Japanese expansionism, which led to the invasion of Manchuria and eventually to the Pacific War. By comparison, the tribulations of a man like Zhang Jiao, whom the nationalists sent to work on the railways rather than using his talents as a banker, were of no consequence. Finance determines the fate of nations. What happens to an individual counts little in the greater scheme of things.